When did you realize someone was all bark and no bite? I was 18 when Tommy got diagnosed with severe type 1 diabetes. Dad made this huge scene at the hospital, crying and promising he'd help Tommy manage his insulin, learn about carb counting, and never miss an appointment. The nurses were impressed by his dedication. 2 weeks later, Dad started forgetting Tommy's insulin doses. He'd be passed out drunk when Tommy needed his nighttime shot. I started sleeping in Tommy's room to make sure he got his medication on time. Dad would scream at us about how hard it was being a single parent, how we didn't appreciate his sacrifices. But while he was giving these dramatic speeches, I was the one learning how to count carbs, calculate insulin doses, and recognize the signs of blood sugar crashes. One night, Tommy's blood sugar dropped to 40. He was shaking and couldn't speak properly. I ran to Dad's room for help, but he was drunk again. I called 911 while force-feeding Tommy juice. When the paramedics arrived, Dad stumbled out and tried to act like the concerned father. The paramedics weren't fooled. They saw the empty vodka bottles, Tommy's unfilled prescriptions, and the expired insulin in the fridge. One of them pulled me aside and gave me a card for child services. I started documenting everything. The missed appointments, the empty pill bottles, the nights Dad was too drunk to function. I took photos of our empty fridge, recorded his drunken rants, and saved the texts where he forgot to pick up Tommy's insulin. The final straw came when Tommy ended up in the ICU. His blood sugar had been high for days because Dad forgot to refill his prescription. While Tommy lay unconscious, Dad was at the bar. He didn't answer his phone for 6 hours. When he finally showed up, he put on his usual show, crying, promising to do better, telling the doctors about his struggles as a single dad. But this time, I had proof of his neglect. I showed the doctors my documentation, and they called child services. Dad exploded when I filed for guardianship. He threatened to make my life hell, to turn Tommy against me, to ruin my chances of ever getting a job. He hired an expensive lawyer and tried to paint me as an unstable teenager. But in court, his lawyer couldn't explain the photos, the recordings, or the medical records. The judge asked Dad basic questions about Tommy's condition, what type of insulin he used, how to calculate his doses, what foods affected his blood sugar. Dad didn't know any of it. I got full custody when I was 19. Dad screamed that he'd appeal, that he'd never stop fighting. But 2 months later, he was arrested for his third DUI. He couldn't even take care of himself, let alone fight for custody. Last week, Dad called from rehab. He needs someone to manage his medications, drive him to appointments, and help him stay sober. He said family has to stick together in times like this. I told him I hope he finds someone who shows up for him, just like he showed up for Tommy. Then I hung up and helped Tommy pack for college. He's studying to become a diabetes educator.